Hey everybody, Sean Dotson here with the flip side. Surprise, it's May 4th, so May the 4th be with you all. And wanted to do kind of, I was planning on doing a Finsomnia this evening, but we're trying to make some plans for this evening with some friends and family. So I decided to try and do one this afternoon, and I'm just kind of calling it Hot Topics with the flip side. So just wanted to do an impromptu show today to kind of talk about some hot topics that are obviously going on. There's been a lot this last month happening since we did our last video. So just wanted to kind of catch up with you all and kind of provide a little bit of the flip side of all the conversations and everything going on. So wanted to say hi to Huli. She was the first one in the room. Hi, Huli. And Jimmy Fast. How are you guys doing? So we are the non-PC beer drinking, thrill of the chase talking show. So I want to say cheers to you all out there. I'm having a PBR today. And it's a beautiful afternoon here in Farmington, New Mexico, which is up in the Four Corners. It's actually about 75 degrees today. And I'm actually wearing a short sleeve shirt, flip flops and shorts today. So it's beautiful here in the, kind of the southern part of the search area, but we all know then the northern parts of the search area, boy, it's still, I think I had seen a picture on Facebook that they had the Beartooth Highway open there in Yellowstone National Park. And I think the snow was like 12 feet deep above the road. It was pretty crazy. And it was taken maybe about a week or two ago. So some of you that are trying to search up in that area, man, I stay away from there. It's crazy. So again, just saying hi to Jake Faulkner, Boy Meets World. That's a new one. Alan K. How are you? Danny White, Steve Wayne, and Tim and Holly. Some new names out there. So just want to say hi to you guys. So just kind of the things I want to talk about today and just give you some of my impression and analysis on some of the things I heard is I want to go back over a little bit about the last video I did with DeCall, Davis, and Dale. And that was all centered around why the poem is so difficult. So I wanted to give a little bit of an update on that to you guys and just some thoughts. And then I want to talk a little bit about Scrapbook 200, which I didn't get a whole lot out of. Forrest Gets Mail 20, Jenny Kile's 20 questions with that classroom that Forrest answered, the Playboy interview, obviously, with Jason Dent that he provided everybody, a great audio interview. If you haven't heard it, man, you need to catch up. And then also just recently here, yesterday, I think Cynthia Meachum came out with an image that Forrest Fenn drew in her book on page 99. So that's new, and people are starting to talk about that a little bit too. So those are just some of the hot topic things that I want to talk about today. Most of you that are in the room already, you kind of know how this works. If you have a question or a comment, you can put that little @ sign, the flip side, and you can direct that to me, and hopefully I'll catch it and be able to respond to you. And if I don't get to it, again, I apologize, guys. Put something in the comments section of the video afterwards, and then we can, kind of discuss it back and forth. So, like I said, the first thing I really want to talk about is our last video that we put together was titled "Why is Forrest Fenn's Poem So Difficult to Solve?" And I think the consensus that a lot of us kind of came up with, at least the panel members in that came up with, is that we really, and again, I'm no authority on the chase, and neither is Dale and DeCall or Davis. We all try and tell you that. None of us have found the treasure, so we don't know anything either. Everything is just conjecture and assumptions and thoughts and theories. So none of us are really, the authority on the chase other than Forrest Fenn himself. So again, everything that we state is just in our opinions. And I try and do a good job of using, verbiage and everything that states that these things are just my opinion. I'm not trying to speak in absolutes. If I do, call me out on it. But I try not to do that. So again, everything I state today is, again, obviously, in my opinion. It is frustrating that we have to say those things. It should be a given, but I think it's just good to not get people fired up, because if you speak in absolutes, it's almost like you think you know where the treasure is, and none of us really know anything, in my opinion. So anyways, there was a lot of back and forth, because a lot of people feel that there are confirmations, built into the poem, or they think that there has to be confirmations built into there. And I'm not saying those people are wrong. I think it's just our opinion that there are not. But to clarify something, I think that a lot of us have gotten what I would call negative confirmations or confirmations from Forrest Fenn that your solve is incorrect or could be incorrect. And those things are like, the treasure is above 5,000 feet. Okay. Well, if where you think the treasure is below that elevation, then obviously you're getting a confirmation that your solve is not correct. And Forrest Fenn has also said the treasure is not above 10,200 feet. So if your solve or where you believe the treasure is located is above that, then you've gotten a negative confirmation, or you can call it a positive confirmation, that the treasure is not in that area. So there are somewhat confirmations, but there are no positive confirmations, again, in my opinion, that you have solved any of the clues unless you find that treasure, or you've gotten some kind of positive confirmation directly from Forrest, that yes, congratulations, you found the home of Brown. And we all know he's not giving that. He may give, subtly, if you can recognize it in his words, maybe that may be a possibility. But then again, that's based on your subjective belief that he is actually giving you some kind of positive confirmation, because he's not telling you directly. He might be saying it just to the whole world. Anyway, cheers to you guys. So I understand a lot of people feel that there are confirmations built into the poem, built into the book, built into the scrapbooks, or random words, surprise words, or anything that's out there. I understand that, but I think that that's based on your subjective belief that those things he's actually telling us are actually confirmations. And I think the only confirmation is going to come is when we actually recover that treasure. Again, just my opinion, doesn't make it right. So just looking over to saying hi to a couple other people. Sledneck, how are you? Good to see you. Journeyman, howdy. So yeah, a couple more people in there. Small group. I love that. I think Davio said something the other day on Mike and K-Pro's show that he likes to put videos out and then just delete them. It's just for those people that show up and take the time to go in there. Great idea. I think that that's cool. We may do that with this video. Who knows? So now I want to jump into Scrapbook 200. Again, guys, if you have any questions or anything you want to state or statements, put that little @ sign in there. But I want to jump into Scrapbook 200. Honestly, I browsed through it really quick. I personally didn't get anything out of Scrapbook 200. I know a lot of people that are probably, into a Montana solve. They may really like this. This may be what they like to consider a confirmation, or something that gives them confidence in their solve may be correct if they're a Montana searcher. So if you're a Montana searcher in this area, this may give you what I like to call confidence, but it's never going to be a confirmation. I think even Davio the other day and Mike and K-Pro's show was talking about, how many coincidences does it take to prove confirmation? And I would tell Davio and those people that have said similar things, I don't personally believe that any amount of coincidences that you ever get will ever prove confirmation. These things may give you confidence in your solve, or that your methodology and everything else is accurate, but it may never give you confirmation. Again, I know I'm beating that horse, but the only confirmation may come from just finding that treasure. So I personally, in reading this, I didn't find anything that really stood out to me as to give any kind of confidence or anything that again, that's based on my subjective opinion, based on where I believe the treasure is or how the methodology of solving this is. But I did see kind of a mirror between this book and Forrest Fenn's Thrill the Chase book, where this writer was telling stories about their childhood, and it's kind of what he was doing. And I really think why Forrest Fenn is really promoting, that we read this book, because it is great. It's good about hearing stories of other people's lives and how they grew up, and getting, to know about different times and how things were different. So Kurt Hensley, how are you? Rusty Nipples. Okay. Cheers to you. That's a new name. I haven't seen it. Jim Black, how are you? Rob G, good to see you again. William, hey, William, good to see you in here. So, guys, I'm not going to go much into Scrapbook 200. I personally didn't see much in it. We did hit a milestone of 200 scrapbooks. Here's to 300. Hopefully, Forrest, keep writing them. We love them. So now I want to move on to Scrapbook 20. And I know all of you guys have seen this, but I'm just going to go ahead and read it. real quick. For those of you that haven't. And it said, Mr. Fenn, I have thoroughly enjoyed the treasure of your story, or the treasures of your stories, and thank you for sharing them. I am blind, and my friends tell me that Ray Charles and I look alike. I am pretty suspicious of the use of those words. My computer can read me your words as I turn the pages, but only the text. I cannot see any of the photos or non-text items. Does this hurt my chances of solving your poem in any way? If I should happen to come up with some sort of solution, I have people that can take me. I may even pretend to solve it just to have an excuse to smell the waters you mentioned and feel the grass and rocks under my feet. I am already richer for having experienced your guided tour of your travels through life. Thank you, Fred. And Forrest responds, well, Fred, because you can't look at any map, you certainly are at a disadvantage. I know where the treasure is hidden, but if I were blind, even I couldn't go back to that spot. Sorry. Thanks for listening to my book. So now I know there's been a lot of talk back and forth on this whole, Forrest Gets mail, and it really kind of feels like a featured Q&A. Is there a real person, Fred, or is he taking, information throughout the blogs and making up this Q&A to give a response to something? That's all subjective, and we don't really know. But let's just assume Fred is a real person. And a lot of people, the way I read this is, again, I think Forrest Fenn is really focusing on his mention that there are hints in the text of his book. Now, everybody knows I'm not a big person on hints. I'm really what I like to call a poem purist, and one that has belief and faith that all the information I need to find the treasure is contained within the poem. But I think really what Forrest Fenn is trying to focus on there is, not the importance of the subtle hints that may be scattered in the book, or excuse me, at least the illustrations and stuff, is he's focusing you back on the subtle hints maybe contained within the text of the book, not necessarily the illustrations and things that somebody may actually physically see with their eyes. Because a lot of people are saying, well, look, he didn't really answer his question about, does it hurt his chances of not being able to see the illustrations and photos and stuff in the book? And he only says your disadvantage is not being able to, look at a map. So I think, in my interpretation, I see it as him stating, look, there's really no disadvantage in not being able to see the illustrations and stuff, but the disadvantage is focused more on you not being able to look at a map. Now, I personally, I know a lot of people don't read it that way, and opinions and interpretations vary, but that's just my interpretation. And then Forrest Fenn saying, even, if he was blind, he could not go back to that spot. And I think that has a lot to do with Forrest Fenn, 7 or 8 months ago, telling us that, even he can't go back to the spot any longer. And I think that personally has a lot to do more with his physical capabilities rather than, him being blind, because even this blind person friend could have friends take him, there. And of course, Forrest is not going to have anybody personally take him back to that spot again, but he's still thinking. I think it has more to do with Forrest Fenn's physical capabilities than him actually if he was blind. Again, just my interpretation, guys. The flip side of the debate, argument, discussion, or whatever you want to call it. Just a different way of looking at it. Doesn't mean it's right. It's just mine. What are you guys talking about over there? Mary Green, how are you? Good to see you in here. Yeah, right, Rusty. A blind person cannot look quickly down. I'll talk more about that and some stuff that came out of, the Playboy interview with Forrest Fenn. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Next, I'm going to move into Jenny Kile's 20 questions that she had. So I'm going to pull that up here. And there was a few that really stuck out to me, and I'm not going to go over each and every one of them. Again, what I'm going to talk about are things that Again, I've got to admit, could be based on my own confirmation bias. Again, I have no confirmation, even as confident as I am in my solution, or general solve, I should say. I have no confirmation that's true. So anything that I read into this is really, I have to admit, and we all should admit, is based on our own personal confirmation bias, because we have no confirmations that any of it is correct. So this is really going to be obviously skewed highly to my poem purist approach to things. The number 2 question was, the treasure chest is cool. I like reading, and I will get some books from the library to help me solve your puzzle. What book should I get? So this person is asking that he really likes to read. He's asking what other books should he get from the library to help solve your puzzle. And Forrest Fenn responds with, you should get The Thrill of the Chase. So Forrest Fenn is not telling him to look for any other books that may be mentioned within The Thrill of the Chase. Those things by authors like J.D. Salinger, Hemingway, or Robert Redford, or any other books that are out there. He's basically telling him, you should get The Thrill of the Chase. And to me, that, it goes back to that whole get back in the box comment, which I'll talk more about later and when the whole Playboy interview thing comes up. But I think, that box simply could just be the thrill of the chase itself, and to stay wholly within that. Again, I don't want to get too deep into that now, but you can tell him if you're looking for books that are going to help you solve the puzzle, then he's telling him that you should get that Thrill of the Chase book. That's the one book that you need. He said, his Thrill of the Chase book is enough to lead an average person to the treasure. That's all you need. And of course, that book contains the poem. Again, you still need to marry those clues, your interpretation of those clues, to a map. So you need the Thrill of the Chase, which does contain the poem, and a map. Let's see, what else stood out to me on this one? The number 5 one, it said, I read your poem, but don't know where the treasure is. What should I do? Forrest Fenn says, read the poem a few more times and start thinking better. Now, this goes back to Forrest Fenn's best advice to people. And what he says to those people is his best advice is read the poem, maybe even memorize it, and then go back to the book, looking for anything that trips up in your mind, looking for hints that will help you solve the clues. But what he's telling this person is, I've read your poem, but don't know where the treasure is. What should I do? He doesn't go back to that whole advice thing again. He doesn't tell him, go back and read the book looking for hints. He says, go back and read the poem a few more times, and start thinking better. Again, this is highly skewed to me as a poem purist, that, being focused on the poem. And the poem is, in my opinion, based on what he has told us, is where all the information is that we need to solve the poem and find the treasure, basically. So he's telling him, go back to the poem, read the poem a few more times, and start thinking better. Again, highly skewed to my way of thinking. I can't see the chat room guys right now because I'm out of there. So how do you decode the poem? Very carefully, with determination and tenacity. Yeah, right. I see Brown is capitalizing her poem. Does that mean it's a man? That is one of the things you should have to figure out for yourself, right? He's telling you. Typical Fenn speak. Is the water in your poem warm because of hot springs or for another reason? Probably one of those 2 reasons, but maybe not. It's just typical Fenn. I love it. Do you play Fortnite? Huh. And here's the one that number 19, and Forrest, the class or whoever asked, how will I know if I have the clues right before my family and me drives out to get the treasure? Forrest Fenn responds, you probably won't. And to me, that tailors a lot back into our discussion about no confirmation, potentially no confirmations that you have any of the clues correct. Because he's telling this person who's asking that question, how will I know if I have any of the clues correct before I ever go out there? And he says, you probably won't. And probably to mean you most certainly won't. There's no, I could look up the word, the definition of probability real quick. Should have had this up already. Sorry. Give me a second. Probably to mean almost certainly, as far as one knows or can tell. So it's you almost certainly won't. If you take that and you flip it around, instead of using probably and use a definition, he says you almost certainly won't. So you almost certainly won't know that you have any of the clues correct before you ever go out there, which completely flies in the face of that whole contradiction out of Too Far to Walk, which is not in the Thrill of the Chase book. It's not in the poem, I know, where he says, you know, I warned that the path would not be direct for those who had no certainty in the location beforehand, but sure for the one who did, which that whole line makes us think that we should have some sort of certainty before of the location before we ever get to treasure. I know, and that's what a big part of our whole discussion was about, where it is somewhat of a big contradiction, right? So that one, number 19 question and response from Forrest, where he's telling us you probably won't. You know, and there's a lot of people that say, well, you could flip that around and say, well, you probably will know. Well, I get that, but that's not what Forrest said. Hey, Sasha, good to see you in there. Sheila Draper, Susie Finhaven, that's Susie. How are you? 23 Monarcha, how are you? Full Press, that's a new one. Yeah, Full Press. Why are you asking Sasha if she's changing her search area? Are you referring back to Forrest Fenn saying in that interview that Sasha's not a major player? Well, that's not true. Sasha is a major player. She's looking in a great state, the great state of New Mexico. Well, Kurt Hensley, you're saying that's funny. No one changes their search area, but hasn't Forrest Fenn tell us the person that's going to find this treasure is the person who can best adjust? You know, and I think that, you know, we may get this preconceived notion of where we believe the treasure chest is without really understanding or deciphering with any level of confidence what the first clue is. And then we think, oh, it's got to be in New Mexico, or it's got to be in Colorado, it's got to be in Wyoming, or it's got to be here because of whatever out of the book or something. And then we take all kinds of information outside the box to try and confirm our preconceived belief that it has to be in that state. And if we get so wrapped and we get so many, like Davio says, so many coincidences on top of each other that we believe that that's confirmation, then we can never give up on that solve. And I think that if we can just block out all that noise and focus wholly on the poem and figure out, you know, where warm waters halt, the answer to that first clue, it'll be more objective, and we will block all that information out. We'll have a better understanding of that. And I think if somebody can adjust and block all that noise out and focus just on the basic evidence, they may have a better chance of finding this thing. Just my opinion. Again, that's highly skewed because I am a poem purist. Yep. So anyway, did you guys want to talk more about Forrest Gets Mail 20, or we want to move on? Anybody have anything on that one? I haven't seen any questions in there. I'm not using Zoom right now. I'm just using right off of the YouTube, so it may not do the same way. Oh yeah, happy birthday to Sasha. That's right. It was your birthday. Happy birthday, girl. 21 again, right? You guys are. I think I was listening to yesterday. I was catching up on the Mike and Sasha, Mike and K-Pro's video, and they were talking about doing this marathon YouTube video where people come in. I think that's a great idea. I think, well, Jason obviously and Sasha did that once before, and it was a great idea then. I love it. I hope that Mike and K-Pro do that. I think it would be a lot of fun. It'd be a lot of fun to get, you know, the different fin tubers in there, different people in there and talking and just having a good time and bullshitting, razzing each other and having fun too. That's always a good time. Steve Wang, that's a new name. How are you? Okay, so if there's nothing more you guys want to talk about the 20 questions, we're like 25 minutes into this. I'm going to move into the Playboy interview because there's a lot of stuff within that I really want to talk about. William, I'm not planning on going to any of the events. I may show up at Femboree. I don't know. Function, the Junction, probably a little far. You know, I'd love to go up there. I think it's a beautiful area, but just money wise and time wise and everything. I just I don't think I'll have a chance to get up there. But Fembury, it's here in New Mexico, so that may be an option to go out there and say hi to some people. So absolutely. There's a lot of people I'd love to meet in this. That Cynthia is one of them. I always wanted to sit down and have a margarita with Cynthia. I think it would be a blast to sit down with Cynthia and Sasha and have a margarita, and even Shelly. I love all three of them. Would love to sit down and have a margarita with those three girls. They'd be a blast. I'd like to sit down and have a beer with Toby too. I'm over the grudge with Toby. Anyway. Okay, guys, I'm going to move on. Let's talk about, I want to talk about Cynthia's book signing on Forrest first. I want to talk about that because I've got so much to talk about this Playboy interview, which is amazing. Again, thank you to Jason and doing the research and getting that and giving it to the community. I think that was a great doing that. So let's talk about, I don't know, have most of you seen this? I think she's put it on her blog. It's over on where I saw it was at Harry's when I first saw it. And Cynthia recently, met with Forrest and had Forrest sign her book. And he actually signed it on page 99. And those of you that don't know, that is the page that has, Forrest Fenn in his F-100 flying. It's an image that he apparently had somebody, an old war correspondent or something, friend of his, draw for him. So I can pull it out here real quick. Age 99. That's the one Forrest Fenn put an X on my map too. Just kidding. 99. Where are you? Yes, I have a book, guys. This is not the one I burned. Okay. There it is right there. That's that page. Everybody knows this one, right? Okay, so everybody, we're on the same sheet of music. Well, anyway, Cynthia recently met with Forrest Fenn and some other friends, and she asked him to, put a doodle or sign in his book or something along the lines, and I may be getting this wrong. Deep thinker, you don't drink beer. How about a root beer float? That's beer. Okay, cheers. Well, anyway, Forrest Fenn put an X on the map and then, signed at the bottom, put an X and then an arrow going up there. And I thought it was fun. And again, I try not to look into too much of this stuff because, again, it's outside the poem, but I always like to provide some conjecture and analysis. And this is completely based on my own personal bias, confirmation bias. We all know it's a MFer in this whole chase, kicks all of our asses. But I look at that and I look at where he drew the X, and then he signed his name at the bottom of the margin, outside of the margin, put an X, and then put an arrow up to the other X. Well, to me, it kind of, I like the fact that he put the X outside of the margin, like unknown. Here's your starting X. Here's where you start from in an unknown location. Again, the starting point all of us are looking for, right? That unknown, where warm waters halt or whatever. And here's Forrest Fenn saying, here's the unknown area. Here's the X. And then it's going to lead you over here to where the treasure is. Well, if you look at where that arrow is, it's crossing the river. And you all know me and that whole video that I put together back in March of 2018 called, To Cross or Not to Cross, where I went into this whole thing about Forrest Fenn never ruling out, a potential water crossing in, the poem, whether that water crossing be just where you trace on a map where you start and where the treasure chest ends, or is that a physical water crossing that we must actually potentially do when we're boots on the ground. And that's what that whole video was about. And you guys, I'm sure, have seen it. And if you haven't, go find it. But to me, that's just my whole confirmation bias is that, oh man, is he telling us this is the most direct route, from the starting point to the ending point? And again, that kind of talks a little bit about, my whole video on is Forrest Fenn's poem, A Map to the Treasure, where I talked about where we need a starting point and then we need the end point, that X on the map where we're trying to find where the treasure chest is. So here he is putting two X's on the map. Is that our starting point and ending point? I don't know, guys. Again, it's just my confirmation bias. Take it what you will. I don't put a whole lot of weight in it. I just think it's fun looking at this stuff and everything else. William, what'd you say? There's a SC where a kid made a picture and asked Forrest to put an X on the treasure. is. It mirrors him. Yeah, is that scrapbook where, or was it Forrest Gets Mail 15 or something like that, where he has that little image of somebody in a raft, and then it's the river, and there's a rock in the middle of the river with an X on it. Is that the one you're talking about, William? I think it was like Forrest Gets Mail 15 or something. I remember joking with Fenn and sending him an email saying, Forrest Fenn, I need to call your house and make sure Peggy knows you're dipping into Jackie's bottle of brandy. You're drunk, just giving him a hard time. Yeah, well, I think it was Forrest Gets Mail 15, William. And again, I'm pulling that out of my head. I don't have it here in front of me, but anyway, guys, that's my thoughts on the whole. I think it's just Forrest being Forrest, and he's having fun. Cynthia's obviously a very well-known searcher and a good friend of Forrest, so of course he's going to pull her leg, and have fun with her. Could there be some meaning behind it? Of course, guys. There could be a meaning behind anything he puts out there, and that's why we just go down so many rabbit holes, and that's the fun part of this. I mean, going down, I'm still a poem purist. I still believe that all the information that we need to find this treasure is wholly contained within the poem. And that's the foundation of my soul. That's what makes me a poem purist. It doesn't mean I still don't have fun going down these rabbit holes with everybody and joking and going on these things. You never know what's going to trip up in your mind. But the foundation of my soul is solely based on the poem itself, which I think most people would agree with. But again, I still think I'm a poem purist. A lot of people don't think I am. Okay, that's your opinion. It's fun. Sean, have seen The Rock or Jack Black in there? I'm not sure what you're talking about. Oh, are you talking about Rock and them? No, I haven't. In Farmington, I know they're around here. They're filming parts of Jumanji up here. I've had some friends that I work with and stuff that have seen them, that pump gas next to, now I can't remember his name. I'm going to totally trip this up. What's the black guy's name? I can't remember his name, but anyway, they were next to him pumping gas, and it was one of my friend's wives, and she didn't know who he was. She just didn't know his name. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. I know his name, but I just can't remember his name. Kevin Hart. Thank you, Deep Thinker. Good job. Yeah, Kevin Hart. My friend's wife was pumping gas next to him, I guess. He has to pump his own gas. It's an average guy, I guess. I don't know what he was driving. It'd be cool. But no, I haven't seen those guys here. But apparently all the wives here in Farmington have been going to Define Fitness because that's where The Rock has been working out. So it's kind of funny. We've been joking about that here. So The Rock has been working out at Define Fitness, so all the ladies are going to Define Fitness. We get a lot of movies and series and stuff that are filmed here in New Mexico now, so it's awesome. Especially up in this area, there's a lot of good, scenery and stuff. Anyway, Jake, what are you saying? Do you think the two X's represent two X's from the missiles dropped from the jet, and where they pointed to those guns look dangerous? Jake, going back well before my whole book burning thing and when I became a poem purist, when I look back at that map, and I can even talk about it now, and I talked with another searcher. I won't name his name because he had said some things he didn't really want me to talk about over on Dal Neitzel's site, that I interpret that, image. I used to interpret that image, and you still can, as Forrest Fenn in his F-100 dropping off two heavy loads into a hidden bunker. That hidden bunker being where the two cannons are sticking out of the hidden area. The two missiles coming down are the two heavy loads, the two trips he took, and Forrest Fenn in F-150. So it looks like Forrest Fenn is dropping off two heavy loads into a hidden bunker being potentially where the treasure chest is hidden. And there was other information in there. It looks like, there's mountains with what could be a canyon. There's a river in there. I mean, you could really go deep into looking at that, but I don't pay that a whole lot of attention anymore. That was just kind of an old interpretation of that, and still kind of sticks with me a little bit and may catch up in your mind, but who knows? But yeah, two X's now. He's drawing two X's on that map. Who knows? I think Diggin' Gypsy was the one that really believed that whole map, page 99, was a map. And this may be news to some people. I did get to sit down with Forrest Fenn on August 21st of 2018, the day before his birthday. at his home and had the rare opportunity to look at all those original illustrations prior to the September 6th event. And I remember going through there and looking at that page 99 original image with Forrest Fenn and him saying, a lot of people think that, is a treasure map and there's hints in there. And I remember saying, yeah, I think it was Dick and Gypsy that thought that. And Forrest Fenn was shaking his head, like as to say no, or that's crazy or whatever. Now, some people interpret that as Forrest Fenn saying there's absolutely no hints in the illustration. That's not how I interpreted it. It got misconstrued a little bit, but hey, that's the danger of secondhand information, folks. And I've warned everybody about that. Secondhand information is very dangerous. It could be very misleading. So I try not to muddy the waters with any of that. But yes, 23 Monarcha. Nothing beats figuring out the poem, and none of us have done it yet that we know of, right? Yeah, Steve Wayne, I think a lot of people think they're just one good hint away from solving the poem. And I don't think a hint is only supposed to help with the clues, right? Isn't that what Forrest Fenn has said? And how they help, we really don't know. Do they help us in figuring out the correct starting point? Do they help us in understanding the methodology of solving the poem? We just don't know. We don't know how they help. Forrest Fenn has said they help. We're supposed to know that, but how they help and what they are in the 32,200 words or 28,000 words or whatever that are in that book, we just don't know. All right. So I'm going to move on to the Playboy interview. And again, I'm going to give a lot of props out to Jason. Jason took the effort to go out there and ask for these audio files, and then take those audio files and put them in a kind of at least a linear fashion of how he believes they came out. If he remembers them, either way, it doesn't matter if they're all jumbled up or whatever. It doesn't matter. He put them out there. So I want to give a lot of props to Jason for taking the time and putting it all together, and then sharing. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to share that with everybody. So I think Jason, as rightfully so in the video, has gotten a lot of great likes for that. He deserves that, and has put a lot of effort in that. So I've listened to that thing like 4 or 5 times and made a lot of notes out of it. Are you saying he didn't? Or was that you, Sasha, that put it all together? Okay, well, tell us the truth. Either way, I mean, we got to give him some props for putting that all together. Sasha, if that's what you and Jason are doing on your weekends and working on videos, shame on you. You guys aren't spending personal time together. Just kidding. Don't beat me up. What? No, he had that interview. Ain't since it happened. Okay. Well, I don't know. I mean, he still shared it with us. I think that's awesome. Maybe he didn't realize how great that information was. I mean, it's amazing. I personally believe that I think that is the best interview that we have had since the Moby Dickens, 2013 interview. And if I could say anything, I think the Moby Dickens interview from 2013 is like Forrest Fenn Treasure Hunt 101. This new interview we've gotten out is like Forrest Fenn 110. It's for those searchers that have been this for a while and really understand the backstory and everything that's happened. If you're a new searcher and you listen to Jason's interview, it just came out, there's gonna be like a lot of stuff that says, well, that doesn't make any sense. What does that mean? But if you're a searcher that's been in this for a couple of years or a while, and you've gone through all this stuff, and then you watch that one, you're going to understand a lot of that stuff. So you've got like Moby Dickens, Forrest Fenn 101, and then Jason Dent, Playboy interview, Forrest Fenn 110, or whatever. I'm not a college guy, so I don't know what it's all called, but I heard it the day it happened. Yeah, no, that's great. I don't care. I mean, it's great information that's out there. It's awesome. And I'm great that the community has that now. But anyway, let's just go over some of this stuff. And some of the stuff I put timestamps in so you can go back and listen to my interview or listen to this and get the timestamp, write it down or whatever, and you can go back and listen to it yourself. But some of it I didn't. I forgot to until I got later into it and saw it. But one of the things I thought was interesting, and again, all this stuff that I'm going to, my interpretations and analysis, some of the stuff is obviously heavy skewed to me being a poem purist. my confirmation bias, everything else. So the way you interpret some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about may be completely different, folks, and I understand that and respect that. These are just my interpretations, guys. But he again talks about the cans of pepper that he used to dull the noses of the dogs when he was shot down in Laos. And this is just my poem purest way of looking at this, is that the thrill of the chase contains the poem, right? Well, the poem is according to Forrest, all the information we need to find the treasure, right? Well, everything else that surrounds it, all the stories and everything else is kind of like that can of pepper. It's all that pepper that surrounds a poem that is dulling all the noses of us searchers trying to figure this thing out. So we continually sniff that pepper, we read that story, we see something that catches up in our mind, then we go running off in a completely different direction outside the box, right? And the box may be just the poem itself, maybe the whole thrill of the chase. We get something trips up in our mind and we go running outside of the thrill of the chase book, looking into history, historical figures, history, everything else. And we dulled our senses into focusing on what may be the most important thing, which is that poem. Just my thoughts on it, guys. Anyway. And another thing that tripped up in my mind through the interview was when he had said the whole world changed for him when he got his Rockwell Commander airplane. And that really opened up his, we know he's a pilot and we know he did all kinds of missions in his training planes when he was a pilot and flying through canyons and everything else. But then he says his whole world changed when he got his first personal aircraft and he's really be able to just open the hangar doors up by himself because he didn't want anybody to help him, get in that plane, shut his radios off, and just fly wherever he wanted to go. And he had hundreds of miles to just do what he wanted to do, and he didn't have to think about gas. If he saw a little town he wanted to fly into, like Lander, Wyoming, and go sit on the river next to the Popo Aggie River and spend the night, he could do those things. He had all that freedom to do that. It's kind of like when you get your first bicycle as a kid or your first car as a teenager. You have that freedom to go do all those things. So I thought that was really interesting. And then he talks about the whole story of following the Laramie River to find Fort Laramie. That he's following a river. It's kind of like the poem, is that the waters he's talking about? I'm not saying the Laramie River, but he's talking about following a river. And then there's one thing that also tripped in my mind. I don't have the timestamp for this, but then he talks about firing the 420 millimeter cannons on his F-100, right? And he goes into this whole talks about everything he goes into. But then he says firing those things, he really felt like Tarzan, king of the jungle. Now, to some of you that understand what that means, that's really going to pop up in your ears because originally, didn't he call, the chess Tarzan? I don't know. There's something that's tripping up in my mind and something that, William Pepper, Dr. Pepper. Yeah, right. David Langley, are you from Langley, Virginia? J.A. Street, how are you? Shane McLaughlin, how are you? We got like 60 people in here on a Saturday afternoon. Cool. Good to see you guys hanging out. Who's a bot? What are you talking about? Right, Kurt Hensley, the pepper makes you smell the elephant and makes you not smell the elephant in the room, right? Right, we're all stepping on ants while the elephants are marching by, right? Or running by. I love that quote. Yes, Jason, you should be quoting him on that. That's an awesome quote. That'll be your next T-shirt. Instead of you putting a T-shirt that says "Nothing ruins a perfectly good solve like boots on the ground," on the back of it, maybe it should say "Everyone's stepping on ants while the elephants run by." Okay. All right. Now something else that tripped up in mine that Forrest Fenn said, and this is where I started putting the timestamps in there. I think it was right around the 32-minute mark. Forrest Fenn said, when something would hit him in the nose, he would make a rule. Because I think the interviewer was talking about Forrest Fenn and all his rules and him making up rules. And Forrest Fenn said when something would hit him in the nose, he would end up making up a rule. And I think that's kind of his whole story about him making his first rule. And that story about him sitting in front of his house and a cowboy going by on a horse, or a guy going by on a horse, and he thought, hey, there's this cool cowboy, and waved at the guy and said, "Howdy, cowboy." And the guy stepped off his horse, came up to him and smacked him in the nose, right? And it caused him to make, when he's 8 years old, caused him, according to Forrest, to make his own first rule. And that was, don't make the alligator mad until you cross the river. So Forrest Fenn is sitting there talking about when something would hit him in the nose, not someone, but something. He's talking about a metaphor. When something that he would try in his life, when he'd test something out and it didn't work, metaphorically, it's smacking him in the nose, right? So he'd make up a rule. And it kind of reminds me of that whole story called The Experienced Skinner. And some of you are kind of familiar with this and know that I've talked a lot about this. Rodney Greenway, hi, I see you jumped in there. You've heard this story before, where Forrest Fenn talks about him finding that skinning knife in the back of this room in France or wherever it was. And he thought it was so special. And he bought it, paid $100 for it or whatever. And he immediately had buyer's remorse afterwards. And he remembered that salesman got him with the oldest trick in the book, which was, it's not how special something is, it is how special that person can make you think it is. So it's all these rules that he's making up. When he would learn a lesson, when metaphorically, when something would smack him in the nose, he'd make a rule about it. And that's how he made up all his rules. So I really like where he's talking about that. I don't know, just something that trips up in my mind, guys, something to think about. Goldilocks, good to see you in there. Yeah, maybe he's telling us that it's too obvious. It's hitting us in the face. It is kind of like that whole, there's a lot of people that are stomping on the ants while the elephants run by. We're so worried about the little things that we miss the big things that are running right past us. Some of us are looking so far ahead that we fail to notice what's right in front of us, right? He says that in this interview too. We're so focused on other things that we're missing the big picture. We're missing, in my opinion, poem purist, we're missing the poem. We're missing what's right in front of us, guys. I'm going to move on. Then Forrest Fenn, after that, goes into talking about the reprint of Once Upon a While. And something he says in there, he says, there's something in the book everyone is going to be talking about. And I don't know, what is that thing? I mean, most people are talking about is the additional star on the front page. They're talking about the new story of Dizzy Dean in there. They're talking about all the doodles. But what is that one big thing? I don't have the revised copy. I haven't bought it. So what is the one big thing we think everybody is talking about in this revised Once Upon a While? Is it the additional star on the front page? Is it, the additional doodles or the corrections? Jason and Illinois Ghost did a great job of doing the comparisons between the two books. If you haven't watched that video, go watch it. They did a good job of, putting those images of both books while they're flipping through them and talking about them. If you haven't watched that, maybe you guys ought to go back and watch that and see what could be that one thing that we all should be talking about it. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Alan K. Good job. He put the omega in it, right? He put the single omega in it. That could be the big thing he's talking about, right? Could be. Or I don't know who brought it up first, either Rodney or Alan. I don't know who brought it up first. But yeah, that could be the one thing we're supposed to be talking about. Again, there's a lot of people that love the omegas. My good friend DeCall Thomas is one of those people. So could that be the one big thing that's in there that he thought everybody's going to be talking about? Sure, right? It's one of the ants, while the elephant's running by. Hey, BJ. Thank you. Sorry, guys. Got to order another beer. Okay. So moving right along. At 38.50, Forrest Fenn says, I'm a little surprised it hasn't been found. And this is where I think a lot of the meat and potatoes of what I see in this whole interview came out. He says, I'm a little surprised it hasn't been found yet, talking about the treasure. And then he goes on to talk about, there is one important thing nobody has thought about. On all the blogs, if they had thought about it, they might have found the treasure. And I'm probably not getting this right because I'm reading my own writing here and I had to scribble some of it out of it. So he's saying that there's one important thing that nobody has talked about. And this kind of, and I know I'm going to probably mess up this quote, guys, because I haven't gone back and looked at it in a while. But doesn't that go back to him stating that, you know, there's one important possibility that nobody, to my uncertain knowledge, has talked about, or something along that line? There's one important possibility related to the winning solve. You know, and what is that? Is this what he's talking about here? There's one important thing that nobody has thought about on all the blogs. So, I mean, that we know that there's tons of information. This includes, you know, even things that I've talked about, grammar, punctuation, all this stuff. So this is beyond all that. You know, this is beyond about what subtle hints or what, everything else. This is beyond all that. It's not to say that any of those ideas about the subtle hints, about whatever else, 9 clues, all this other stuff isn't important, but there's one thing that we're all missing or we're not talking about, at least openly. It could still be something that is whispered amongst searchers or whispered in emails to Forrest Fenn and all this other stuff. You know, so what is that one thing that he believes that, you know, if we had thought of, we might have already found the treasure? And that's, you know, I think a big take out of this that we ought to be looking at. And he immediately said after this, and this is one of the things that really stood out to me. I've said it a number of times, get back in the box. And this whole thing goes back to let's see if I can pull this up. I don't have it up here, so it's going to take it back. Type this up. You guys talk amongst yourself. I'm pulling up Jenny's whole featured Q&A. I think it was back in 2016 that he said this. Yeah, and I'm going to read this, guys. You guys are all familiar with this, I know, but I'm just going to read it again. Let me see. When was this said? Jenny changed her whole thing. So, okay, July 1st, 2016. I specifically remember this because I was coming back from a search. Cheers, guys. Mr. Fenn, I am not even close to solving your riddle. I've tried for months and nothing works. I'm not asking for a clue to the treasure. I'm asking for a clue to the clues. Please help me. So it seemed, and it was signed Mary. So Mary's like almost asking for a hint. Forrest Fenn responds, Dear Ms. Mary, the solve is difficult for many searchers because their minds think the clues are tougher to decrypt than they really are. Some say they are trying to think outside the box as if the solution lies out there or lies somewhere out there. Until now, I have resisted telling them to get back in the box, where their thoughts are comfortable and flow more easily. The blueprint is challenging, so the treasure may be located by the one who can best adjust. To illustrate my point, go to YouTube, Smarter Every Day. So what really, you know, stands out to me, like Forrest Fenn is saying in the interview at the 39:20 time frame, he's saying, I've said a number of times, get back in the box. And then he goes on to say, they're looking outside, and then he stops. He says, they're looking so far ahead, they can't see what's laying in front of them. So again, this kind of goes back to the whole, you know, people are stepping on ants while the elephants run by. You know, they're so focused on what I like to call the minutia, you know, the nitnoids of things, that they're failing to notice what's right in front of them. Now, whether you believe that's information in the book or whether you think that that's, you know, the poem itself, that's completely up to interpretation and debate. I personally think it's the poem. I think that we're, you know, the poem really, to me, is that smaller portion of the box. It is contained within the thrill of the chase, and I think that the box really is the thrill of the chase itself. But a lot of people, like he says in there, the solve is difficult for many searchers because the mind thinks their clues are tougher to decrypt than they really are. Again, according to Forrest Fenn, it's very straightforward, but to us searchers, it's not, because we're not him. We're not the architect. We didn't put it together. Some say they are trying to think out the box as if the solution lies out there or somewhere out there. So people are continually trying to think outside the box or looking outside that box, whether you think that box is the poem itself or, you know, the larger portion, the thrill of the chase. We keep looking outside of it for the answers as if the solution lies out there. We're delving into history. We're delving into historical figures. We're looking way outside, you know, the box that I think he has given us, which should be at least a bare minimum, that thrill of the chase. And even if, you know, you can even make that much smaller, the poem itself, we keep looking outside that. And now he said, until now, I've resisted telling them to get back in the box where the thoughts are more comfortable and flow more easily. He's telling us to focus back in on the book, you know, and to stay within there, in my opinion. And I'm probably getting flamed on this one. William, I see your question. What changed from the box comment to the gut feeling comment? I think they're totally separate, William. I think that you know, the get back in the box is more about, again, you know, staying within the confines of what he's kind of given us, which really is, go back to the 20 questions. He's telling people 20 questions that Jenny just put out. He's telling this person who's wanting to get several books to help them out with a puzzle, and he's saying, look, just get the thrill of the chase. He's not saying to go get Hemingway. He's not saying to go out and get Redford. He's not saying to go out and get J.D. Salinger or many of the other books that are out there. He's saying, get the thrill of the chase. The thrill of the chase may just be that box that we're supposed to be confined within. And then the gut feeling comment is more about, there was something that he really felt that the treasure would be found this year. And if you'd go back and watch my video with a Gypsy's Kiss, when they were, you know, talking to me about the gut feeling and stuff, I really felt at that time that the gut feeling really centered about that there's possibly a lot of people that are really narrowly focused on what may be the correct general solve. Now, fast forward a year later, I really feel now that gut feeling was more centered around something that was out of all of our searchers' control, and that was Mother Nature herself. And that means that last year we had a very dry season amongst the whole Rocky Mountains. We had very little snowfall. We had very little rainfall. So we didn't have a major runoff. Rivers weren't high, everything else. So that, again, it's based around my confirmation bias that there potentially could be a river crossing. But, you know, the rivers weren't that high that year. So it could have been things that were out of our control. So I think we're talking about two different things, William. I could be wrong, but that's just, you know, hey, interpretations and opinions vary. That's just mine, man. I saw another question here. I wanted to hit it up real quick. Flip side, do you think the box could be a square state? No, not really, because if you go back to Forrest Fenn's one comment about somebody was saying, you know, he can't stand his clues, or I don't have a clue to a clue, your precious clues, whatever, all this other stuff. And Forrest Fenn said, stop armchairing that thing to death and get out there where the box, you know, get out there in the trees where the box is. You know, but before you do, read the poem as if it were a map, because it is. And like any other map, it will tell you where to go if you follow its directions. So, I mean, he's used different times. He said box. The box could just be the treasure. The box could be, you know, the confines of the information that we need to find this, which is, in my opinion, at least the thrill of the chase book, and even more so as a poem purist, the poem itself. So, hope that answers your question, Kurt. But, you know, anything is possible, like Toby likes to say. So it could be a box search day. What is the only one that's even looks like a box? Maybe Colorado, right? Could be that. I don't know. Is that a hint towards it? I don't think so. You know, I'm not big into the hints. Hey, Zozo Rocks, good to see you. All right. What else I want to talk about here? Okay, now at the 49:15 second mark, he said the treasure chest is not hard to find if, and then he said it is difficult if not. I really thought that was a really interesting question, because now you can insert any kind of, you know, your own adjective or whatever you want into that. And then immediately after he says the treasure chest is not hard to find if, and then he trails on to say it is difficult if not. Immediately after that, he says there's people looking for the treasure in Yellowstone, tromping through the snow in the dead of wintertime. You know, and then he says that person, and this is huge, he says You don't deserve to live. You know, he's telling the. I mean, I'm like, wow, Forrest, holy cow! I think he wants that to come out. That's going to hurt a lot of people's feelings. He says there's people looking for the treasure in Yellowstone, tromping through the snow in the dead of wintertime. Now, I'm not getting that exact. I know my writing here isn't exact because he trails on and says a couple different things. Then he says that person doesn't deserve to live. So it makes me think. Listen, if you're the treasure chest is not hard to find if you're wise. It is difficult if you're not wise. So if you're stupid and you're doing things that you shouldn't be doing, you're not paying attention to some of the rules he's told you. Is don't go where an 80-year-old man wouldn't go. Don't go in the wintertime. Wait for spring. These other things, you don't deserve to live. You're making stupid things. And I know that, this is very non-PC to say that, but, the things that like Randy was doing, the things that Eric Ashby and Paris Wallace were doing, they weren't thinking. They were making mistakes. They weren't thinking of his rule. Don't go where an 80-year-old man wouldn't go. Why are you, trying to cross a river in the middle of winter time? Why are you trying to cross a river when it's raging during the runoff? And why are you on a Walmart inflatable raft going down the Arkansas River in the worst place, class 4 rapids? You're doing things. Don't do stupid things. So to me, you could take the word wise, straight out of the poem and pop it in there to say the treasure chest is not difficult to find if you are wise. If you are not wise, it is difficult. Right? If you're making stupid things, and stupid things are going to happen to you guys. And again, that's straight out of the poem where he says, if you have been wise and found the blaze. If you have been wise, and wise can mean you've come to the knowledge or become aware of something. Whatever that something is, whether that be the methodology of it or wise to where, the correct starting point is or whatever. And how do you figure out the correct starting point unless you become wise to the methodology that he used to encrypt this poem or come up with writing and putting it together? Yeah, John Edo, exactly. Smart kids can find it, right? Like you said that with Jenny's things. Sure, not everybody can find it. You got to be wise. You got to be smart. You got to be intuitive. You got to be savvy. I don't know, guys, rambling on there, but that one really stood out to me. I'm sure as a lot of you. Now, moving ahead to, this was at the 44-minute and 40-second mark. Forrest Fenn said, somebody's going to find that treasure and Pandora's box is going to open real wide. Now, this is, I think this has got a lot of people going, oh my God, what happens? It's going to blow up. All kinds of crap is going to happen. What does he mean by Pandora's box? Why is it going to open real wide? What's going to happen? And then he follows that by restating something he said to us before back in the, I think it was a featured questions in late 2016 from Jenny Kile, where he had said, if you find the treasure, put it in a vault for 30 days while you think. And he's kind of mirroring that by saying something a little bit different. Again, he can't remember all his own quotes, but he says something like, if you find the treasure, put it under your bed for 30 days and do nothing but think about it. Don't do anything but think. And why is he telling us that? Because, at least in my opinion, guys, like he says, right immediately after he said, there's going to be a number of decisions that have to be made. And you're right. I think that the person who finds this treasure and then immediately goes out there and tells everybody they found it, guys, there's going to be a rain of fire that's going to come down. And I'm not just talking about the government, or whatever that's going to come down on you. There's going to be, in my opinion, I think there's going to be a lot of, there's that 7% from the search community that I think it's going to come down on that person. Sure, you can come out immediately, or maybe immediately after those 30 days that Forrest Fenn tells you to think about it, and tell Forrest Fenn, so Forrest Fenn can immediately tell, and dragons too, right? Yeah, Zozo rocks. That this, God, no, I lost my train of thought. I'm going back to Game of Thrones. Where'd I lose my? Thanks, Zozo. You totally threw me through a curve. Okay. So yeah, there's going to be a number of decisions you have to make, and that person that comes out there and immediately tells the search community that is found and reveals their identity, not only are they going to have the government and the IRS and everybody coming after them, even though they're not even doing anything with it yet, you're going to have the 7% of the search community coming after you. I mean, we've seen what happened to poor Christy when somebody threw out her real name and everything else. We know what happened with that, you know, and even close to this guy, you know, that was all negative stuff. So the person who comes out there and tries to say what their name is and everything else, and they found the treasure, can you imagine what's going to happen to that person? I feel sorry for that person. So think about it. Don't immediately come out there. Take time. Pandora's box is going to open up. There's going to be a lot of decisions that finder is going to have to make. And I think Mike and K-Pro did a good show that talked about it. I think even Jason and Illinois Ghost and Sasha put out a video talking about that too. And that's great. We need to be thinking about those things. We all need to be, because we don't know which one of us is going to find it. So yeah, I think his wise, sage, savvy advice telling us to think about it is very important, not only against what, like he says, you know, who's going to appraise it, what's the IRS going to do, what are these 7%ers going to do. So think about it. But Pandora's box, I mean, I've kind of likened to whatever is in that treasure chest that Forrest Fenn doesn't want to talk about, that is saved especially for the finder. Maybe that one thing that Forrest Fenn has built in there that will be the reason how he knows the treasure chest is found. And to me, I think it's a lot like, you know, Poe's story about the purloined letter, and that there was something in that letter that, what is it? And there's a quote out of, and I'm going to totally mess this up. Golly, you know, what was that quote? Like, oh man, I'm totally messing this up. The finder's knowledge of the robber is dependent on the, anyway, guys, I'll find it. I'll put it in the comments section. It's a great quote, but it basically states that the only way that the finder will know that the architect of this will know that the finder found it is the releasing of that knowledge that is contained within it. He may not know who the finder is, but he will know it is found based on the knowledge that is contained within that. And is the knowledge that is contained, you know, somewhere, and this goes back to, you know, probably part of, you know, K-Pro's looking into the FOIA. Is there something in that treasure chest that if the finder finds it, it is so valuable and interesting that if released, Forrest Fenn knows that information only came out of the treasure chest. Now he knows it is found. He doesn't know who the finder is, but now he can, you know, unequivocally say, listen, it's been found because this knowledge has been released. Just a theory. I don't think it's possible, but it's plausible, right? Anyway, something to think about. How did I get off on that tangent, guys? And then immediately Forrest Fenn went in to saying, I spent $8,000 with an attorney to find out what happens if this thing is, you know, if it's located on, and he goes into other different, you know, national forest, national park, BLM land, private property, everything else. And this really kind of mirrors the whole video called, you know, who's the rightful owner of the treasure chest. And this, I think, was with an interview with Barry Peterson, where Forrest Fenn is asked, you know, by Barry, you know, what if it's found on Indian land, national park land, or private land? And Forrest Fenn talks about, you know, I spent a lot of money or a lot of time with the lawyer trying to figure out the answers to those questions. Now, me, you know, thinking on how I think, I look at the flip side of this and go, okay, if Forrest Fenn has said, I was going to make this thing happen no matter what, why would he need to spend a whole bunch of money with a lawyer? If this place is so special to him that this is where he wanted his bones to rest, where he wanted to put the treasure chest, everything else, why would he care about the eventual finder? Why would he give a rat's ass their issues with trying to keep this thing? Why would he go out and spend all this money with a lawyer, all this time with the lawyer, everything else to try and figure out the legalities of ownership if he really was just going to make it happen no matter what? He wouldn't care at that point. I'm just going to do this. It's going to be the boldest move I ever made, and I'm just going to do it if he didn't care about us. So what's the priority? I don't give a shit what happens to them, or I want them to keep it. You know, there's this balance. So you got to ask yourself, why would he spend $8,000? Why would he spend so much time with the Lord if he was just going to make it happen no matter what? That's a rhetorical question. You can come up with your own thoughts on that, and I'm not asking for your answer. I think it comes down to, we're talking about a treasure hunt initiated by a man whose initial thought in this is, what, screw the world, I'm going to take this with me no matter what, to it kind of turned into one of, he who, teaches a child labors in the workshop with God. You know, that whole quote that came out of In Love with Yellowstone or something like that, where he talks about, going 50 miles out of the way on his way to Wyoming to go to a one-room schoolhouse to see this one statement that was written over the door, where it said, he who teaches a child labors with God in his workshop. So I think, he's all teaching all of us. So it changed into a treasure hunt of, I'm just, screw the world, I'm going to take it with me, to one of, I'm teaching all these people. I'm giving them all these kind of life lessons and getting them to work, right? Hey, Rick, I see you in there. Illinois Ghost, good to see you. Again, guys, these are just my thoughts. It doesn't make them true. Just different thoughts, a flip side of different arguments out there. Yeah, again, I was going to make it happen no matter what. It's a special place. Why would he worry about what lawyers thought? We know how he thinks about lawyers, right? Anyway, okay, I'm going to move on. 47:45. This is the mark here. He said the word trove is a very important thing. And he goes into talking about trove. And then he talks about, the difference between, abandoned property and storing property. Now, I'm not going to go deep into this. I want you guys to do your own homework and to go looking up the definition of trove. It is something that is intentionally hidden or purposefully hidden. And it could be considered abandoned property. It can also be considered someone is storing this with the intent of coming back to get it at a later time. So it's still technically their property if it is abandoned property. Exactly why Forrest Fenn goes into this whole thing about, according to in a national park, that person that finds it has to give it to the superintendent. The superintendent has 2 to 3 months to contact the original owner of it, and going on about that. So I think you need to do your homework on the word trove, because Forrest Fenn, even in his own words in the interview at the 47:45 mark, talks about it's an important thing. The word trove is a very important thing. Is it the key word or a key word in the poem? I don't know. I look at that whole stanza, in there. So why is it I must go and leave my trove for all to seek? The answers I already know. I have done it tired. Now I'm weak. I really look at that as not a directional clue, as more of a legalities. And I've talked a lot about this. And even I think Mike Callings even, talked about that in his latest video with K-Pro here a couple weeks ago. And I think they're hitting the nail on the head, too. It talks a lot about legalities. And I think that's very important to talk about that in his poem, because he does have to pass title of the gold and everything else to that person. And I think him using that word trove and saying for all to seek is very, very important in there. May not be a clue that gets you closer to the treasure, but it may still be a clue talking about how the treasure may be hidden. It has to be deliberately hidden or concealed. Is it sitting out in the open where somebody can stumble upon it physically or metaphorically? You have something you have to think about, right? Okay, moving on. This is at the 49-minute mark. Forrest Fenn says, so many searchers are stopping on the ants while the elephants run by. Again, and then he goes on to say, I don't know, that kind of really stands out to me, like, so many people looking so far ahead, they fail to notice what's right beside them. And this is actually a quote that Forrest Fenn says on one of Mysterious Writings, featured Q&As. And it stood out to me because I remember stating, in there, a hypothetical example might be an answer to a hypothetical question or something along that lines. And then like 30 minutes later, immediately after I'd said that, Forrest then said a hypothetical example of a what if. So this is going back to the what ifs questions. I think that was in 2016. So you can go find this. Forrest Fenn responded, A hypothetical example of a what if might be, what if people, what if someone is looking so far ahead they fail to notice what's right beside them? And this really, kind of mirrors this whole, so many searchers are stomping on the ants while the elephants run by. It, to me, and just my interpretation, again, very confirmation bias, very subjective, is that people are so caught up in the minutia of looking at the little things, those subtle hints, that they fail to notice the elephants or the poem, which is right in front of them. They're failing to miss that. They're failing to interpret that. They get stuck up in the minutia of these subtle hints and everything else, that they're not taking the time to really pay attention to the poem. I'm not saying everybody does. I'm just saying this is just how my mind thinks about it. And then he goes on, Forrest Fenn immediately goes on to say, the world's worst thing is a hunch. And then he goes on talking about, there's people that've got hunches. There's a couple of people with hunches out there. And then he goes on and talking about, somebody driving 1,500 miles to look underneath a wagon. And then Dale Neitzel gives you, if you go back and listen to this, Dale Neitzel gives you a little bit of history on who I believe he's talking about. We won't go into that. Yeah, Sasha, I think the government will give you a fight for it. Again, I think if you're trying to, I remember when I was on the car ride with Forrest Fenn back from Harry's Roadhouse back to his house, Forrest Fenn directly asked me, Sean, what are you going to do if you find the treasure? And I, facetiously said to Forrest, that's a surprise. I don't want to tell anybody that, and then Forrest Fenn went on the whole thing. Well, if you're going to have to get it appraised, you're going to have the IRS that's going to have to appraise it, and that's going to take months and all kinds of other stuff. And then he went on to the same thing, like you hear in this video, about him talking about it being, what if he rented a cabin and, he buried in the front yard, all that stuff. Same stuff I've heard before from him, even prior to the video coming out. So it's interesting, but who's to say that why can't you do it in a private sale? What if you were to privately sell that thing? Now, if you were to come out and tell everybody who you were, the IRS knows who to go after, right? Okay. What if the IRS doesn't even know who you are? What if you sell that thing out in a private sale and you just move it away? If you're not concerned about the hoopla, your 15 minutes of fame and everything else, and telling everybody you were the person to find it, then who's to say you can't do it in a private sale? I could sell somebody my keychain for $10 million, right? Okay, I'll still pay taxes on that $10 million, but I don't need the IRS to do a whole audit of the whole treasure chest, lay it all out and do everything else. I just gave it to a private seller or buyer, right? The worth of a thing is what that thing will bring, right? Adam Smith taught us that. Moving along. This was at 5150 mark. It's not important enough that you look at it. You got to see it. And that really stood out to me. Forrest Fenn says, it's not important enough that you look at it. You got to see it. And he says there is this distinct difference between you looking at something and you seeing it. Exactly. There is a difference, and you can look it up in the dictionary. There is a difference between look and see, just as there is a difference between hear and listen. Now, and I've talked about this, to hear something is a passive activity. You can hear all my words, but more than likely you're paying attention to the chat room right now. You hear what I'm saying, but you're not listening to me because you're over here reading the chat room. So there is a difference between listening. When you're listening to something, you're paying close attention. You're analyzing. You're thinking about what's being said. You can, if a book, you can't help but hear stuff. It's a passive thing. You can hear stuff all the time, but are you paying attention? Are you listening closely to what is being said or what that activity that you're hearing actually is? So just as there is a difference between hearing something and listening to it, there's actually a difference between looking at something and actually seeing it. And this, I think, really ties directly into, look quickly down, but tarry scant with marvel gaze. There is a difference between looking at something and actually gazing at something. There's a definite difference, just as there is in here and listen. I think you have to understand the difference in those things. Again, my personal opinion, but I think Forrest Fenn is really pointing that out to us here. It's not important enough that you look at it. You have to see it. You've got to see it. There is, in his own words, there is a distinct difference between you looking at something and you seeing it. I think that that's very important, that we ought to be thinking about that and what that really means. Does that mean we'd be paying attention to word meanings and everything else? I'll let you make up your own mind on that. But I think if that's coming from the architect of the poem, I think that that's important to hear about. Completely outside the poem, I didn't need that information to understand that I needed to know the difference between hear and listen. But again, it kind of gives me more confidence in how I'm looking at this thing. Doesn't mean I'm right. It just means it gives me more confidence. Okay. The 59:20 mark, Forrest Fenn said, or this was actually the interviewer asking him this question. This is right at a point where I think Jason was trying to tie a couple different, audio clips together. So it was kind of jumbled a little bit, didn't make sense, but then it kind of made sense more as you go on. Where the interviewer asked, did you make deliberate mistakes in your poem? And if I could give a little bit of backstory on what I think the conversation was prior to this, was where Forrest Fenn has talked about in other interviews where he makes deliberate mistakes within his books, and he waits for people to point those things out. And we can look that there's many deliberate mistakes that we know are found within the thrill of the chase, and really probably more centered around the chapter in important literature, where he makes a couple of very deliberate mistakes, which is talking about Hemingway's book For Whom the Bell Tolls. We know that he made deliberate mistakes because he's actually talking about a different book that was written by Hemingway. When he talks about mud and bombs and dead horses and all this other stuff, we know that was a different book, and that escapes me right now. But if Forrest Fenn didn't think much about that book, obviously it wasn't, because he got it completely wrong. He read about a third of it, thought it was horrible, and threw it in the trash. So of course he got it wrong. It doesn't matter. And then he goes on to obviously make a deliberate mistake about Robert Redford. If he ever had written a book, would have done it better than these guys. Well, that's a deliberate mistake, right? We know that that Robert Redford actually wrote a book, The Outlaw Trail. A lot of people look at that as being a subtle hint, or a hint to a geographical area or something else. Who's to say that's incorrect? Not this guy, But again, is that just a deliberate mistake he's just throwing out there, just to get people to talk? Who knows? It could be. Cheers, guys. Uh-oh. What are we talking about? Stealing clues. I'll have to go back and read that later. That's obviously interesting. So, but the interviewer, Alex, I think is his name, says, did you make any deliberate mistakes in your poem? And Forrest Fenn goes to say, no. I worked on that poem forever. I mean, I can't tell you how many man hours, he put into that. And I'm probably getting that completely wrong. I'm trying to read my own writing here. And I changed it a lot, and he goes into talking about that. So he's saying he did not make any deliberate mistakes in that poem. And we also know he's talked about, there's no subterfuge in that poem. It's straightforward. He worked on that thing for 15, and he talks a little bit more about that over the years he's worked on that, whether it be 15 years or whatever. We don't know exactly the time frame. And then he goes on. This is, I find it really funny, the 1 hour, 11 minute, and 11 second mark. So 1:11:11. He says, it doesn't matter how good the book is. It matters how good a person thinks it is. So again, it goes back to that rule that he learned from that, French salesman in The Experienced Skinner. It's not how special something is. It is how special, that person can make you think it is. And he's really made us think that book is so special. But is that book the pepper that surrounds the poem? Is that book, all the information that is going to lead us astray, that is going to dull our minds and send us on these rabbit holes outside of what may be the box, the Thrill of the Chase book itself, which incorporates that poem? That is my opinion. doesn't make it right. I think that the poem, as a poem purist, this is my confirmation bias, is all the information that we need to find that poem. Everything else that surround it may contain subtle hints. But what if those subtle hints, all the information that we need to understand those subtle hints, are wholly contained within the book itself? We don't need to go outside of the book looking into historical figures, history, geographical places. Yeah, you got to marry them on the map, so maybe that doesn't count. But we don't need to go outside the book to understand what those subtle hints are trying to tell us. And again, this is just my confirmation bias, but if we look at the one line that is just prior to the poem stating, "So I wrote a poem containing 9 clues that, if followed precisely, will lead to the end of my rainbow and the treasure." What if that is a subtle hint? This is just a big what if, but all the information that's contained within that line just prior to the poem can be solely understood within the confines of the book itself. We don't have to go outside of the book to understand those things. Even like the colon that's just prior to the poem. And you guys know I've talked a lot about this, and the purpose of a colon is to list an item or a series of items. And what could that item be but the poem itself or the 9 clues? 9 says 9 clues. I know a lot of people don't agree with that. But he gives examples throughout the book of how that colon is used. When he talks about the items that Skippy had to have, to go to his graduation, he talks about the different soda pop tops he used to collect. There's a couple examples in there. The different newspapers he used to deliver, on Canyon Street and West Yellowstone. He gives those examples. Is that how a subtle hint works? Maybe. Is the confines of the box that we're supposed to get back in and not think outside of solely the book itself? So could those subtle hints that he talks about subtle clues, I should correct myself, that are contained or sprinkled within the stories, wholly contained obviously within the book, and the information to understand those, one does not have to go outside of the book to understand that stuff. Everything's solely contained within it. Again, guys, that's just my interpretation, the flip side of the whole, debate of subtle hints and clues and everything else. Doesn't make it right. Just another way to think about it and look at it, guys. So I really don't have much more to talk about. I kind of just want to open up the room, say hi to some of you guys, answer some of your questions if I can go back and see them. I know you guys do a great job of not hearing what's being said and listening to each other in the chat room, and that's perfectly fine. That's what these live chats are for. It's great for you guys to talk to each other. So just going to say hi to some of you guys, see what's going on. Jungle Cruiser, that's a new name I'm seeing. Sheila Draper, how are you? So what's going on with this whole stealing a clue thing? I got to find this. What's going on with that? There's no intellectual property in this whole chase. If you're going to put something out in a YouTube video or out on a forum, you're putting it out for everybody. So if that's something that trips up in somebody else's mind and they're able to, if that helps them with the clue and figure something out, guys, you got to be careful. If that's what you think, is important, then you got to keep it to yourself. Again, I've said in one of my videos before that I can't understand why somebody would put out the interpretation of one of their clues if they had any real confidence, confirmation, certainty, whatever you want to talk about, in the answer to that clue, unless that person was looking for some kind of affirmation or confirmation from other searchers. But once you put that information out there, that belongs to everybody. And I think that the eventual finder of this treasure will not ever be able to say that they solely figured this thing out on their own. I think that this is in one way or another, this is a collective effort in trying to figure this thing out. That the one person, unlike myself and everybody else that is a FenTuber or a poster on the forum, probably the smartest person in this whole thing is the one person that doesn't say a damn thing. That keeps to themselves, that is the most quiet person that doesn't say anything. That's probably the smartest person, that may be the person that figures this thing out. Not us guys on YouTube or not anybody on the forums or anything else. I think the smartest person is the person not saying a damn thing in this thing. But again, I just don't understand why somebody, if they had so much confidence in one of their interpretations of the clues, would give that out, unless they're looking for some kind of confirmation or affirmation from somebody else. Just my opinion. So there's no stealing of clues. You know, if you're going to put something else out there, you know, it belongs to everybody now. You know, the real probably solve on this thing is going to be a melting pot of all the ideas that are out there. So really, I think we all in some way own the correct solve. And I think that's a good way of thinking of it. You know, I mean, I don't know. I think you guys are talking about lawsuits. I think a little bit about Sassy. Is that I haven't watched that video, that whole video with Sassy. Cheers, guys. We are passing the hour-and-a-half mark. I want to wrap this up pretty soon, guys. Yeah, Kurt, I don't know if it's brilliant, but I think that all of us in some way should have some kind of ownership in this, you know, the correct solve. I don't think that the person that finds it will be able to solely say, you know, this is something I did all on my own. I think we all probably need to admit, and I think this goes into this whole question of what does the solver owe us? And there was a video out there, I think it was K-Pro and Mike that did this. Again, if this final solution, the correct solve to this is a group effort, and we all own a small piece of that, the finder should be wise enough to understand that this is something we've all done together in one way or another, and that what that eventual finder owes the community is irrefutable proof that the treasure has been found. One, for a couple of reasons. One, we don't have other people going out there and risking their lives. That's the most important thing. Two, we don't have people going out there and wasting their money looking for something that's no longer there. Now, if you're a searcher who believes that if you find it, you want this thing to go on, it doesn't. Then you don't have to give out the solution. You don't have to give out the location, because now you are one that believes that, you know, it is the thrill in the chase and not the quarry. You know, like Forrest Fenn quotes the Devine statement so much. They never knew it was the chase they sought and not the quarry. And again, that really actually comes from Blaise Pascal, not Devine. And Blaise Pascal had said they never knew it was the chase they sought and not the quarry. So if you're a person that really is a lover of that thrill of the chase and you decide not to give out the complete solve, I think that we owe the community the irrefutable, undeniable proof that the treasure has been found. Whether Forrest Fenn is still here with us or he is gone and then can confirm it, we owe that to the community so people are not risking their lives and wasting money on something that's not on. If they want to go out there and search because they still love the thrill of the chase and want to match wits with Forrest Fenn and the finder, then great, that's fine too. But those that believe that they want to piecemeal it out, not tell anybody, blah, 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 anything else, I don't agree with that. But if you're the finder, you can do whatever you want. I think that the search community is, I hate to say entitled. I think that's a wrong word, but I think that we all deserve that and need to know that it has been found. Now, nobody is entitled to the correct solve or the where it was found. We're not entitled to that at all. That's just my opinion. I don't think Jimmy Fast is saying Fenn has searchers wasting money searching in 3 states that the treasure is not in. Sure, we know it's only in 1 state, right? We know it can't be in all 4 states. It can only be in one of those 4 search states. You're right, but we're not wasting money on it. We just haven't become wise enough to understand where it's at yet. You know, why should he narrow that down? Why would he narrow that down more for us? I mean, there's a lot of people that say, Forrest Fenn, you need to narrow it down by another search state, eliminate one or eliminate it. No, he doesn't. All the information we need to find that correct starting point is within within the poem. And once you figure that out, you'll know what the correct state is. Well, you won't know it, in my opinion, until you find it, you know, for certain. But the poem has all the information contained within it to tell you where that location is. You know, is there a lot of people think that there's confirmers outside of the poem within, you know, the subtle hints or subtle clues contained within the poem. Who's to say they're wrong? Not this guy. I personally don't believe it, but okay, you know, that's to each their own. What else do you guys want to talk about? Rodney Greenway, you got a 2010 GT Mustang. Sweet. Nice. I'm a Mustang fan. All I want right now is a 93 notchback. Yep. But the thing is you shouldn't have got a 2010 GT. You should have got a 2011 GT, because the 2010 still had the with the 4.63 valve in it, and you only got like 200 or 305 horsepower. If you would have waited till 2011 and got the 5.0, you would have had over 400 horsepower. I know, girl. I know. I had a 2010. I know, and I sold it immediately. So yeah. Anyway, but I love the body style change when they changed it from 09 to the 20. My favorite, if I could buy any Mustang, Rodney, right now, if I had the money, it would probably be a 2013 GT 500, because that was the year they went from the 5.4 to the 5.8. Because well, the funny thing is you had a 2011 Mustang that was nearly putting out the same horsepower as a 2012 GT 500. It made absolutely no sense, because the 5.4, the stroke on it was completely wrong. So they had to change it to the 5.8 to get more stroke, more horsepower, everything else. Everybody was just like, screw the GT 500, just buy a GT, put a supercharger on it or a Kenny Bell on it, and you're out running a GT 500 or a Z06 Corvette. I'm a car guy, guys. I could go on. Yeah, I know. I honestly, I'm a big fan, Rodney, of the 03 Terminators. I had an 03 10th anniversary convertible Cobra, and that was my favorite one. I had to sell it when we bought our house, just because it was you want a house, you want a car, what do you want? So yeah, but I'll get another one. I am a car guy for sure. Mustangs, big time. But now I want a Jeep. I really want a Jeep so I can take the kids out and go Jeeping. And I'm in a great place for that, guys. I'm in an amazing place for Jeeping if you're a Jeep person. As I get older, these toys like Mustangs just don't make any sense. They're just not practical. They're fun as hell, but not practical, guys. Jake, what are you saying? I know you're a poem purist. I'm somewhere in between. Why not use the books to find hints to help the clues, maybe? I'm not talking about a ball string. Jake, this goes back to well before I became a poem purist, because I guess I didn't, and everybody should know this story about me. I didn't start out as a poem purist. I didn't get into this and automatically say, oh my God, I'm a poem purist. I never even heard that term. And I'm just not going to look at anything in a poem. I evolved into a poem purist. And a lot of my first solves were right here in New Mexico, in the state of New Mexico. And they were centered around a lot of hints and a lot of things that people were doing before me. And then if you go watch my video, Evolution on a Poem Purist, it really explains this. But there was a point in time where I realized, there was a couple of featured Q&As that Forrest Fenn had talked about, where warm waters halt and somewhere in the mountains north of Santa Fe. And it goes in, I don't want to go too much detail, but I really realized that there was so much noise out there, so much stuff that was confusing me, that I just really needed to focus on the poem. There's just too much information out there. The book, according to Forrest, has 32,000 words or whatever in it. And everything in there is so subjective to our personal biases that we believe that it must be in Yellowstone because he talks so highly of it. Or this, thing he talks about in, the waterfall being so special to him in Vietnam, that's got to be what water high is. There's so many things in us that'll trip in our mind, in our subjective mind, based on our personal experiences, our specialized knowledge, everything else, that it just leads you down a myriad of rabbit holes. And if Forrest Fenn has told us all the information we need to find the treasures in the poem, why not just stick with the pure evidence that we have? And that is just the clues. And I wasn't focusing so much on the clues. I was looking at key words or words and phrases within the poem, and then looking outside of the poem in the book and finding things that tripped up on my mind that matched up to those things, and then going outside of the book itself and looking at historical figures, historical places, everything else. And it just went down. I know you guys are nodding your head because it's the same thing we all do. So to me, I became a poem purist, and what I determine as a poem purist, again, you can't look up in any dictionary and look up the word poem purist, and it gives you a definition of, what most people like to think is a poem purist definition is some guy who's stuck in a basement somewhere with nothing but a flashlight and a poem. Well, that's just hilarious in my opinion. But my interpretation and what I believe a poem purist and how I define it is somebody that has a belief and faith that, as Forrest Fenn says, all the information I need to find the treasure is wholly contained within the poem. So again, understanding word meanings, grammar, and yes, punctuation are key in me understanding this. Does that mean I'm right? No freaking way. It's just the methodology and everything that I believe in. And I haven't found the treasure chest, so I have no confirmation that that is right. I have a lot of confidence, but no confirmation, guys. So yeah, sure, you could go. I could look at and everybody knows that I know these quotes. I know the book just as well as probably anybody else out there. But those things are not the foundation of my solve. The foundation of my solve and the cornerstones of it are the 166 words in the poem. Everything else outside of it can be the checks and balances. Don't look below 5,000. Don't look above 10,200. Don't go where an 80-year-old man. Stay within those 4 search states. All those things are the things that we know are confirmations that your solve is wrong if they don't fit within those things. But we have no confirmations that they are right, obviously. So I use those things as checks and balances to keep me within the confines of the box, so to speak. But sure, I could use all that, but all that stuff is just, like I've said 100 times in this, subjective to my confirmation bias. It's all subjective. You got to understand the difference between subjective and objective. And I think, M. Davis and I are talking about doing a video on that, and we will eventually do that and what that really means. Jake, I know what you're saying about this a lot. I enjoy the rabbit holes, guys. It doesn't mean I don't go down them because I learn so much about things going down these rabbit holes. I learn about historical figures. I learn about history. I learn about different geographical places I'd love to go visit and take my kids. But I know when I'm going down these rabbit holes that the information I'm researching may have no bearing on my ability to find this treasure. Sure, they're fun and interesting. You never know. They may lead to some epiphany or breakthrough. I'm not saying they can't. But for me as a poem purist, I know that I have to recognize confirmation bias. And to me, the best, nobody can avoid confirmation bias. Even as a poem purist, I cannot avoid confirmation bias. But to me, the best way to mitigate that or limit that as much as possible is to stick with the pure objective evidence, which is the 9 clues within the poem. Now, whether you think those clues are between begin and cease or they're all 9 sentences in the poem, that's completely up to debate. And again, that, in my opinion, matters not if one can understand the poem as a whole and circumstance their way to the treasure. And when we find this, when somebody finds this, who are we to question how that person found it? There's a lot of people out there right now that are trying to say, okay, before this thing is even found, that this person had to find it because they used this subtle hint or used this. I'm like, what? You gotta be freaking kidding me. How can you, before this thing even found, trying to tell how this finder actually found it? Who are we to question the person who finds it? If that person says that they took a jar of peanut butter, pulled out a handful, threw it up against the wall, and it looked like the state of Montana, and that's what gave them confirmation where it was, and that's where they found it, who are we to question that person's methodology? Right? Shit, I don't know. It's hilarious in my opinion. Anyway, guys, I know we're going on an hour and 45 minutes here. It's been a great couple of weeks in the Chase community. With the Scrapbook 200, Scrapbook 20, Forrest Gets Mail 20, the 20 questions that Jenny Kile gave us with Forrest from a classroom. The interview from Jason Dent, which is that he put out there, is amazing. This whole thing with the 2 X's on the map. We've had a great couple of weeks, a lot of fun stuff to talk about. I love listening to everybody else's opinion on the forums and in the other YouTubers that are putting out great stuff. It's been a great couple of weeks, guys. I love it. It's exciting. The search area is starting to open up, except in the northern states, guys. There's a lot of snow still up there. Again, you know, be safe out there, guys. Don't do anything stupid. Think about your family. You know, if you're going to do something you think is a little risky, think about those loved ones at home that want you to come home. Don't do anything dumb, guys. Yeah, J Street, the explosion's coming soon. Maybe it's found. Maybe there's some new information that's going to come out there. Guys, I love chatting with you guys. Wouldn't be doing out there. We love putting this stuff together. Mike, if you're watching this, I love the idea of doing the whole 9-hour whatever, you know, YouTube long conversation. I'm sure there's a lot of people that love to be in there. I think it'll be a lot of fun. So, guys, it's been a lot of fun chatting with you guys today. I know I'm gone on trying to keep it under 2 hours. So hope that you guys like this, and we will catch you all on the flip side. See you guys.